The morning began with the same dull rhythm as every other. The sound of the alarm clock was sharp and insistent, pulling weary eyes open in a dimly lit room. The wallpaper was peeling in places, and the air carried the faint scent of yesterday's coffee. The apartment was small, barely large enough to fit a narrow bed, a second-hand desk, and a shelf stacked with old yellowing books that had been rescued from thrift stores and discarded piles. Everyday life offered little comfort. The wages earned from long hours at the factory barely covered rent and basic food. The paychecks disappeared quickly: rent, utilities, a few groceries, the occasional bus ticket. Luxuries were not even considered. Each day seemed to blend into the next, a routine of fatigue, monotony, and invisibility. At the factory, the air was thick with the metallic scent of oil and the constant roar of machinery. Workers shouted over the sound of grinding gears, their voices swallowed by the endless repetition of production. The job was simple: operate the same machine, push the same buttons, monitor the same conveyor belt. It required no imagination, no spark of creativity, only endurance. Colleagues exchanged tired greetings, spoke of debts and illnesses, complained about supervisors, and returned to their stations. Yet, beneath the surface of this ordinary existence, something stirred. Behind tired eyes lived a restless curiosity. During breaks, while others smoked or stared at their phones, there were scribbles in notebooks, quick sketches on scrap paper, and silent calculations. Old textbooks, borrowed from libraries or scavenged at flea markets, were read until the pages frayed. The passion was not driven by money or ambition. It was the pull of unanswered questions, the excitement of exploring what might be possible. Thoughts drifted constantly toward energy: how it was used, how much was wasted, and how it might be created in ways the world had not yet discovered. Machines at the factory were inefficient, running hot, losing power, and consuming vast amounts of fuel. To most, this was just the way things worked. But not to the quiet observer at the back of the room. At night, when the long shift finally ended, the real work began. The small desk in the apartment transformed into a laboratory. Empty cans and glass jars became containers for experiments. Wires scavenged from broken electronics were twisted together. Candles provided both light and data, their flames studied as energy in its rawest form. Each experiment was fueled not by resources, but by relentless persistence. Dozens of failures filled the notebooks. Formulas crossed out, diagrams redrawn, circuits rebuilt. There were sparks that fizzled, reactions that collapsed, devices that melted or burned out within seconds. Each setback brought frustration but also taught something new. The failures became steps, each one building toward an invisible summit. Isolation defined this journey. There was no one to share the discoveries with, no mentor to provide guidance, no laboratory with proper tools. The world outside continued as it always had, blind to the secret experiments happening in a cramped room. To neighbors, the quiet worker seemed unremarkable, a solitary figure who kept to themselves and never caused trouble. Still, the vision refused to fade. The idea of harnessing energy in a way no one else imagined became an obsession. Late nights turned into early mornings, with only strong tea and sheer determination keeping exhaustion at bay. The notebooks filled with more equations, drawings, and half-formed ideas than there were pages to hold them. The dual life became heavier with time. Days were consumed by the drudgery of labor, nights by the fever of invention. Sleep shrank to a few hours, and meals became irregular. Some co-workers noticed the fatigue, dark circles under the eyes, sluggish movements during the day, but dismissed it as overwork, nothing unusual for people struggling at the bottom. Despite the hardship, there was an unshakable belief that something extraordinary lay just beyond reach. Every failure seemed to whisper, "Try again, but differently." Every spark, no matter how small, hinted at the possibility of something bigger. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, the breakthrough came closer than ever. A makeshift device, assembled from scavenged wires and odd scraps of metal, hummed faintly. A flicker of light appeared, dim but steady. It lasted only a few seconds before vanishing, but it was enough to send a surge of hope through tired veins. This moment, though brief, revealed that the dream was not just fantasy. The impossible might actually be within reach. The thought was electrifying. Exhaustion faded into determination. The notebooks filled faster than ever, sketches refined, ideas tested with renewed urgency. The world outside remained unchanged. The city still groaned under the weight of traffic, pollution, and rising bills. People still rushed to jobs they hated, came home to small apartments, and complained of power shortages and high costs. But in the silence of one neglected apartment, a revolution was quietly taking shape. The first part of the journey was complete. The seed of genius had been planted in the soil of ordinary life. The discovery was not yet ready, not yet strong enough to face the world, but it was alive. And once alive, it would never be silenced again. The evening air outside was damp with the scent of rain, but inside the apartment, the heat of effort filled the room. The desk was cluttered with scattered components, wires stripped of insulation, cracked circuit boards salvaged from discarded appliances, and jars of water clouded with chemical residues. Every inch of the space carried the marks of restless invention. Another long day at the factory had left muscles aching, but the fatigue was quickly forgotten once the notebooks opened. The latest sketch, a delicate balance of magnetic coils and chemical cells, was different from the countless others. It combined fragments of ideas that had once seemed unrelated. Perhaps this, finally, was the missing piece. The device came together slowly, hands working carefully despite their trembling from exhaustion. Each wire was connected with a sense of ritual, each screw tightened with a breath held in hope. When the final connection was made, silence filled the room. Nothing happened at first, no light, no sound, just the disappointing stillness of failure once again. Then, suddenly, a faint hum rose. A glow spread across the improvised coil, soft but steady. A small lamp attached to the system flickered, then burned brightly, powered without the usual strain or sputter of conventional energy. It was stable, efficient, clean. Heart-pounding, the reaction was repeated. Again, the lamp glowed with effortless brightness. No excess heat, no wasted sparks, only smooth, continuous power. What had seemed impossible now shone in the middle of the tiny apartment, casting long shadows across the worn walls. 4 hours, the device was tested, adjusted, and tested again. Every trial confirmed the same truth. This was not a fluke. This was something new. Energy, created with a fraction of the resources usually required, delivered with a stability and efficiency that existing systems could not match. The magnitude of the discovery began to settle in. The implications stretched far beyond the small apartment. Cities could be powered without endless fuel consumption. Villages in remote areas could light their homes without costly infrastructure. Hospitals could run without fear of blackouts. The world, long starved of affordable and clean energy, could be transformed by what had been built in secret. Excitement soon gave way to fear. What would happen if the world knew? Would they laugh, dismiss the idea as impossible? Or worse, would powerful forces try to steal it, suppress it, or claim it for themselves? The thought of losing control over the invention was terrifying. The notebooks, filled with years of hidden work, suddenly felt fragile, like treasures too valuable to keep in plain sight. Despite the fear, there was no turning back. The invention demanded to be tested beyond the walls of the apartment. A small demonstration was staged the following week, carefully planned. Old acquaintances, people who had long overlooked the quiet worker, were invited under the pretense of showing something unusual. The guests arrived skeptical, tired from their own daily struggles. They crowded into the small space, unimpressed by the clutter of wires and jars. But when the device was switched on, the room lit up instantly, bright and steady. Gasps echoed. Jaws dropped. Questions flooded the air. How? Is this real? Show it again. Every repetition silenced doubt. Even the most skeptical faces softened into wonder. For the first time, recognition replaced invisibility. The invention was no longer a secret. It had witnesses. Word spread faster than expected. One person told another, who told another, until strangers began reaching out, asking to see the device. Within weeks, small gatherings turned into larger demonstrations. Engineers, journalists, and local officials came. Some dismissed it as a trick, others demanded explanations, but all left with the image of a single lamp glowing brighter than reason should allow. The world outside the apartment began to shift. Invitations arrived to present at conferences. Letters came from investors promising wealth. Reporters camped outside the building, eager to capture the story of an unlikely inventor. The once-forgotten factory worker was now thrust into a spotlight that had never before been imagined. But the attention was a double-edged sword. With recognition came scrutiny. Experts demanded to know every detail of the design. Corporations hinted at partnerships but also at control. Governments asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like interrogation. Behind every handshake, there seemed to be another motive. Yet, even in the chaos, one truth remained clear. The invention was real, and it worked. For the first time, hope outweighed fear. Poverty and obscurity were fading into memory, replaced by possibilities as vast as the energy now glowing steadily in the room. The spark of genius had ignited, and nothing could extinguish it. The journey was no longer private. It had become a movement, one that promised to reshape the future of the entire world. The factory no longer echoed with the familiar rhythm of machines and endless labor. The routine that had once defined life, alarm clock, uniform, conveyor belts, was gone. In its place stood a schedule filled with meetings, interviews, and flights to places that had once seemed unreachable. The journey from obscurity to prominence had unfolded with dizzying speed, and the contrast was overwhelming. The invention had moved beyond demonstrations in a cramped apartment. It was now displayed on polished stages at international conferences, surrounded by banners, lights, and the clicking of cameras. Crowds of scientists, policymakers, and investors leaned forward in their seats, eager to witness the impossible become undeniable. The same device that once flickered quietly in the corner of a small room now lit entire auditoriums. Applause thundered wherever the invention was revealed. Articles appeared in major newspapers, headlines declaring the arrival of a new age of energy. Documentaries were filmed, portraying the inventor as a visionary who had emerged from nothing to change the fate of humanity. The anonymity of the factory worker had vanished forever, replaced by a figure of global attention. Wealth followed as swiftly as fame. Contracts worth more money than ever imagined arrived one after another. Investors competed to secure partnerships. Offers came to build laboratories, to fund production facilities, to patent the technology worldwide. Bank accounts, once nearly empty, now overflowed. The tiny apartment was replaced by spacious homes, sleek offices, and the kind of luxury once reserved only for dreams glimpsed through shop windows. But wealth was more than just comfort. It was influence. Invitations came from world leaders, who sought private meetings to discuss how the technology might solve energy crises or boost their economies. Speeches were delivered in halls where history had been written, addressing audiences filled with diplomats and scholars. For the first time, the quiet voice of someone who had once been ignored carried weight across continents. The transformation was intoxicating. Gone were the days of invisibility, of exhaustion without recognition. Now, every step was followed by cameras, every word recorded, every action analyzed. The world treated the inventor as both savior and celebrity, showering praise while also demanding more. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, there was unease. The invention had been born in solitude, crafted in silence, free from interference. Now it was surrounded by agendas. Corporations pressed for control, governments demanded exclusivity, and rival inventors sought weaknesses to exploit. The simple joy of discovery was overshadowed by the complexities of power. Late at night, in quiet hotel rooms overlooking vast cities, there was a longing for the old desk, the worn notebooks, the simple thrill of seeing a light flicker for the first time. Surrounded by wealth and admiration, there remained a trace of nostalgia for the anonymity of the past, when the invention belonged only to its creator and not to the entire world. Still, the responsibility could not be denied. The technology was too important, too transformative, to keep hidden or small. Factories began to rise, producing devices on a scale that could power villages, towns, and soon entire regions. Reports flooded in from remote communities that now had light for the first time, from hospitals that could finally run without interruption, from schools where children studied long after sunset. The invention was no longer just a personal triumph, it was a lifeline for millions. Every story of a family saved, every letter of gratitude from a community lifted out of darkness, reinforced the sense that this path, however complicated, was necessary. But with every success came new challenges. Critics warned about dependence on a single source of energy. Economists worried about the collapse of industries tied to older fuels. Political leaders argued over who should control access. Conferences meant to celebrate often dissolved into heated debates. The inventor, once invisible and voiceless, now carried the burden of these questions on weary shoulders. Every decision held global consequences. To share openly or to guard secrets. To prioritize nations in need or to satisfy investors. To focus on rapid growth or to proceed cautiously. The transformation was complete, but it carried a heavy price. The worker had become a symbol, the obscure had become indispensable. Life had shifted from survival to influence, from isolation to constant visibility. And yet, in quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded, one truth remained clear. The spark of genius had not been about fame or wealth, but about the possibility of giving something extraordinary to humanity. The stage was now set for the most difficult part of the journey. Not invention, not recognition, but the responsibility of wielding such power in a world filled with both hope and greed. The applause that once felt like a triumph began to sound different. Louder, more insistent, it no longer carried only admiration but also expectation. Every conference, every meeting, every speech was followed by the same questions. When will this be available everywhere? Who will control it? How much will it cost? What are you hiding? The invention, once a personal miracle, had become a battleground for the world's ambitions. The pressure was relentless. Governments fought behind closed doors, offering promises or issuing threats. Corporations dangled fortunes but demanded ownership. Old industries, facing collapse, waged campaigns of doubt, spreading rumors that the technology was unstable or dangerous. The media built the image of a hero, but the same media was quick to turn suspicious, searching for flaws, waiting for failure. In the midst of it all, sleepless nights returned, not in the quiet of a modest apartment, but in luxurious hotel rooms and sprawling estates. Papers and blueprints covered every surface, revisions drafted in haste between meetings. The invention, though already changing lives, was far from finished. There were improvements to make, dangers to anticipate, safeguards to design. The fear of misuse loomed constantly. Memories of the factory resurfaced often, the clatter of machines, the faces of tired workers, the feeling of invisibility. Back then, the struggle had been survival. Now, the struggle was responsibility. Every decision affected millions. A single signature on a contract could shape the future of entire nations. Stories poured in from places transformed by the technology. Remote villages celebrated their first electric lights. Hospitals in crisis zones ran equipment that saved lives without interruption. Schools expanded their hours, children studying late into the night. These victories were the heart of the mission, proof that the invention truly mattered. But alongside gratitude came greed. Smugglers tried to steal prototypes. Corporations demanded exclusive rights. Military officials hinted at weaponization. The same device that brought light and healing could also be twisted into tools of dominance. The weight of this knowledge grew heavier with each passing day. Isolation returned, but in a new form. Surrounded by crowds, celebrated on magazine covers, admired by millions, there was still a sense of standing alone. Few understood the inner conflict, the tension between giving freely and guarding carefully, between the promise of progress and the danger of power. At international summits, voices clashed. Some leaders argued that the technology should be owned collectively, a resource for all humanity. Others demanded control for their nations, citing security and sovereignty. Accusations filled the air: favoritism, secrecy, corruption. The inventor stood at the center of storms that no calculation could solve. In private moments, the question repeated endlessly: what is the true purpose of genius? Was it to create and share without limit, trusting others to use it wisely? Or was it to protect, to limit, to prevent the darker sides of humanity from twisting invention into destruction? Wealth and fame had once seemed unimaginable, but now they felt irrelevant. No luxury could outweigh the burden of responsibility. The invention was no longer about personal triumph, it was about the survival of trust, the preservation of hope. The final decision was made quietly, far from cameras and microphones. Instead of selling control to a single power, the technology was distributed through an open foundation. Patents were placed under protections that made them free for humanitarian use but safeguarded against exploitation by corporations or militaries. It was a choice that angered many but offered balance, a way to ensure the invention reached those in need while limiting its misuse. The backlash was immediate. Investors withdrew. Politicians raged. Lawsuits emerged. Yet, despite the storms, communities continued to light their homes, hospitals continued to run, and schools continued to thrive. The invention had escaped the grasp of greed and found its way into the hands of those who needed it most. Looking back, the journey seemed unreal. From the dim corner of a factory to the grand stages of the world, from poverty to unimaginable influence, the path had been marked by sacrifice as much as by triumph. Genius had never been the goal. It had been the byproduct of relentless curiosity, of refusing to let failure end the pursuit of discovery. In the end, the true reward was not wealth, not fame, not even recognition. It was the sight of light where there had once been darkness, the sound of children learning where silence had reigned, the hope of a future no longer shackled by energy scarcity. The price of genius had been heavy. Sleepless nights, crushing responsibility, the loss of anonymity, the constant pressure of global expectations. Yet it was a price worth paying. The invention had not only changed the world, it had proven that even the most ordinary life could hold the power to alter history. And so, the story closed where it had begun, not with the roar of machines or the monotony of labor, but with a quiet spark of possibility. A spark that had once flickered in secret, now illuminating the lives of millions, reminding the world that genius can rise from the most unexpected places.